No, now you can hear me, I hope. Apologies for being a little bit late. Right when I was going to sit down and start, I remembered that I had forgotten some of the tools I need most for what I'm going to do today. So I went and got those. I see we've got Quindy, Zachariah, Valander, probably some other people that are not chatting. And did I remember to look for questions? No, I didn't. Let me just check my PMs real quick. Nope, there's nothing in my PMs. Okay, so I suspect this camera's still flickering. I remembered about that when I was going through my little test buttons right before I started, and my husband very wisely suggested that 10 minutes before starting would not be a great time to address that problem. So let's try the regular view. And I don't know that there's going to be a lot for this camera to do other than apparently show you chaos. So maybe this view would be better for today. Oh, and there's green users, Bob and Julie. All right, so I'm going to work on some basing stuff and possibly, well, we'll call it sculpting with quotes since Bob and Julie are here. And I'm sure they need a laugh. There's even, I have a side cart. Oh, yes, Valander noticed the bruise inside my elbow. Nothing terrible has happened to me. I went to the doctor and just for my annual, and they need to do a blood test, and I'm a hard stick. So I gave them the spiel. They tried what can work. It didn't work on that arm. They had to go over to the other arm, so this arm got a little bit of bruising. This is not at all an unusual experience for me. I think the worst was 3 times in each arm before I was like, is there maybe someone who knows how to do this around? But now I know where they have to go in a side vein, not the main one. And I give them the spiel and they either are like, nope, that's too hard. Someone else has to do that, or they generally get it right. Other than it doesn't look like they got it right. That's not the worst one either, because there was another time a couple years ago, I went in and the same thing happened, that not enough was coming out. I mean, just for a blood test even. I get a couple extra things on my blood test, but not like crazy weird. And they didn't put the pressure on, and there was so, like, the bruise was so bad about an hour or two after I got home that I actually called back and I said, like, do I need to worry about this? Should something be done? Like, this is very alarming looking. And they're like, no, it's fine. So last week, if you weren't here, and I'm sure the video is still available here on Twitch, and Quindy also uploaded it on Reaper's YouTube channel, I talked about the... Valander wants to know how you use Laughing Cow delicious cheese in basing, and you don't. You reuse the little package for putting basing crap in. So there's like a million different... I've got some of these things. I've got old tea canisters. I have repurposed many things to storing basing materials. Does the system work? Just now, the experience I had looking for things suggests that maybe it's not perfect. But anyway, Zachariah, yeah, I wouldn't really put the cheese on the basing. I'm not saying I've never seen organic materials used in basing, but they did not last long. So last week I was talking about the MSP Open, encouraging people to enter. I was trying to give you some examples to make it easier to understand which category is the correct category to enter. And I also, since I have the new camera set up, I'd done this before, shown some of my figures. And some of my figures are good examples for, they go in this category, they don't go in that category. But also if you're interested in seeing some of the things I've painted to completion, rather than the things that I just kind of mess about with on the stream, that is a good show to watch. But mainly for if you're coming to ReaperCon or even another open style show, the categories are a little different and it will help you understand that. But during the process of going through things, I also talked about some basing stuff. And back when, a while back, I think I talked about how I went through my sort of, miniatures like this. I had a bunch of like half completed things, and some of them were like, this is something from a class that I took. And I went through them trying to determine, what do I need to keep or want to keep, and what can move on and free up some space in my house. But some of the things I put aside because I thought they would be good examples for talking about some basing issues and stuff. So there was this one and this guy are things that I did some basing on like roughly a million years ago. Pretty close to when I first started painting, within the first few years of when I first started the miniature hobby. And then I also have some figures that I've worked on the show that aren't completed, and to a degree that might be because I want to work on the basing. And then the actual sculpting, but with air quotes part, is if you've been here before when I've been working on this guy, I keep saying I don't want to paint this. So I've come up with something else to do with it instead of paint it as a weapon that has more detail than I feel like dealing with for it. This was an experiment with Reaper's super washes. So they're like you paint over white or like a zenithal prime or something, and you just kind of tint stuff. I mean, I approached it a little differently, but it's not meant to be a super fancy, I put 40 hours into this miniature so that I should do something nice with the weapon. At this point, it's just holding it back from getting finished and being the kind of figure that it is meant to be. So let's solve that problem. This guy, if I think I've talked a few times about how I started with Reaper's Learn to Paint kits that were available at the time. I have the contrast set for dealing with white, so anything painted is going to look a little dark and dingy. So this is one of the first two figures I painted. This is not how I painted it originally. I had stripped it and then started to paint it again, and I never did finish it, and there's just something in me wants to finish this, and I've been meaning to do it on stream. But this is an old metal miniature, and I've noticed like there's just nothing really practical to do to stop the metal rubbing off on the edges. So I thought, why don't we stick this guy down on a base and maybe do something with it. So we'll see what we'll get to. I also want to try to talk about when I was going through the MSP thing, I was giving some examples of stuff that you can try to do better if you want to start improving your score or respond to some of the frequent issues that the judges see. And some of those things were related to bases and kind of construction presentation. So I thought I might use this as an opportunity to create some examples for that as well, but we'll see if I get that far, or maybe I'll pause in between. But before I do anything else, I think this is Procreate epoxy putty. It's very similar to green stuff. It's just gray and it's a little less sticky. I don't have any good green stuff right now. And then this is epoxy sculpt, which is my favorite to use for basing type stuff. It is also a 2-part epoxy putty. This one is, Milliput's similar to this as well. I think there's something called Magic Sculpt that is also similar. It's a little bit water soluble, so you can use a wet brush or wet tools to do joins well. And this is an example of not doing joins well. So, I put it too high. So my goal with this figure was to kind of create like a swamp base. This was, I probably made this before even the round bases that kind of have a depression in them were very common. Certainly before Reaper made their recessed bases. So this is what I had, was just a bunch of plastic Games Workshop, probably bases from a friend. So this miniature comes with an integral base, and the integral base is part of the story since it's like a smoky, foggy, misty deal. But I wanted to have it like she's floating on top of a swamp. So these are meant to be like bulrush leaves and stuff. Oh, and little bulrush. I forgot I'd actually made little bulrushes too. I am kind of bummed I never painted that part because that was the part I was excited about. And now I've given her weird. This was practicing for a different miniature. That is not. That I was not painting a banshee with fishnet stockings. I mean, now I'm tempted to try to come up with a concept why that would make sense, but that's not a base thing, so we're not going to talk about that today. But so what I did was I got some green stuff because that is all I knew about at the time. But you can see that ridge, and you'll get a similar sort of thing. Sometimes you're trying to, like, you know, maybe I was doing a swap on the arm of this guy, and I put the new arm on, and there's some gaps, and you'll get a similar problem sometimes with green stuff with the gaps that it looks smooth while you're working with it, and then later you go put primer on it or whatever, and you discover that the join is in fact not smooth. Epoxy Sculpt is nice because and Milliput, you can smooth it with water and be a lot more confident that you're getting those joints smooth. But you can't get as much fine detail. It's not as rubbery, which also is kind of nice for bases because you can go back and scrape and sand and etch this stuff. Like this stuff dries hard, where green stuff is rubbery and you can't always do that. I just don't like the feeling of it on my hands. I mean, this is a good idea. A lot of people end up getting sensitivities to epoxy putties and stuff. So this is a good idea from that point of view, because mixing is really when you're the most in contact with the products. So let's see. I think there should be some cheese discussion. Cheese and blood. That's what we're talking. If anyone came late, today's topics are cheese and blood. Valander, I used to get blood very often, but they don't allow me to anymore. 9 months in Scotland in the 90s equals potential mad cow, can never give blood or be an organ donor. Yes, I too remember the days of mad cow. I would have been fine, even though I visited England, but I was a vegetarian at the time, so it would have been fine. Well, actually, no, the first time I went, I wasn't a vegetarian, so maybe it would have been a problem. But that was the 80s, not the 90s. Valander also thinks that, because Green was just talking about cheese being a good sculpting medium, which is probably true, comparing it to soap, but it doesn't last. But probably hard cheese rather than the soft. I mean, you could use the soft cheese, kind of like if you watch the one where I did some flames and stuff with the gels, that's what you use the soft cheese for. Like how I'm going to use some of these pastes on bases and stuff. So basically you want roughly equal parts. If you actually are into sculpting, first of all, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know today. I'm very confident. But there are reasons to use different proportions. It'll make it cure slower or faster. It'll make the end result stiffer or less stiff, I think. Less, dry harder, less harder. And some people even mix like this one and the other one that I showed you together. And assuming you don't put too much of... No, I think people do mix these ones together, but some people even mix like Fimo and stuff, I think, that is not a self-curing. So the thing about these 2-part ones that's nice is they are self-curing. So I'm not going to have to do anything other than wait for these to, harden up and cure. Whereas if you are using Fimo or Sculpey or one of those things, they're like really easy to work with and forgiving, but you have to bake it or it will never be done. So if you attach it to a plastic base, that is bad. You cannot bake it then. I just wanted to get a start. This stuff will be workable for about an hour, I think. But it changes properties throughout. If I need more later, I'll make more. The 2 parts, the nice thing about green stuff is, and why it's called green stuff, 1 part is blue, 1 part is yellow. So you keep doing this until the whole thing looks green. With these gray ones, it can be a little less obvious if you are done. And the point of this is just to store those in. So I'm debating, I might not mix this straight away because I got to do some stuff to this. Maybe I won't get to this one. Maybe we'll just do basing today. And I'll get to that later. For extra laughing. I mean, I looked up a turkey leg and I really, really hope that even my sad sculpting skills are up to making a blob shaped like this that doesn't have little bumps on it. That's about all I have to do is make a smooth blob. So surely even I can do that. All right, so then this guy's example was, and I genuinely have no idea what I was thinking. Did I mean to put sand on later? But why wouldn't I prime the sand? I mean, this is a million years ago, but I don't know what I was thinking. Because I cut out this, like he had this little beetle guy, which I actually have no idea if Reaper still makes those available. He had a little base I had to cut him off of, I think. And this guy's a slotted base, which I want to talk about slotted bases a little bit. So that's when the miniature, I had one. That's when the miniature comes on a tab like that and the base has a slot and you put it in there. So let's just grab this out. Mixing epoxy sculpt and green gives you a very good consistency from sculpting. And this is from Bob and Julie, who I think definitely know what they're talking about. So we should do that. Aves does things in multiple colors, and I got an orange one so I could see the mix completing. They have different kinds of putties though. Like one time I think I went to Hobbytown and they didn't have this one, and I got whatever. The other thing looked very similar, and I think it even had a similar name, and I did not care for it. So I stick with that one because I know what it do. Valander is asking whether epoxy sculpt and green stuff is a better mix than milliput and green stuff. There is some difference between milliput and epoxy sculpt. I don't think it's huge. Milliput has a weird smell. So I found this stuff and so I prefer it. I don't know that their properties are wildly different. So this is what the slotted base miniature, and this is a Reaper. This is from the virtual expo, and this is a Bones USA. Don't think it's very common that they're still putting a lot of things on slotted bases, but it's going to be a possibility. And if you go back into the archives and buy some of the old metal, in particular anything from the Warlord line, it's probably going to come like that. So these offer you the flexibility where you can chop this off and put a pin in the foot and then put it on like a pre-made base or a base that you sculpted separately. So I could do something like that. But I'd have to cut that off, of course. But sometimes you just, they attach more securely and then you don't have to bother to make a pin with this. But then you have to check the joint. So one of the kinds of problems that we'll see at, when we're judging is, Zachariah says the Aves orange stuff is the same as far as what the Aves store said. Well, I would think they would know. Valender's asking about green stuff or brown stuff. Last time I checked, which, things come and go, brown stuff was no longer available. Somebody brought it back very briefly, but so far as I know, it's not available. It's similar to green stuff, but you can get flatter, sharper results with it. So people have typically preferred it for making weapons and stuff like that. I would assume that if it's harder like that, it is also better for carving and shaving and whatnot, or easier for carving and shaving. You can shave green stuff. I don't think you can carve it in a good way. Green users likes Fimo plus green. You have to kind of watch the percentage there though, because the Fimo doesn't self-cure, right? So then, but the thing about these two-part ones, I'm not going to notice it here, but sometimes they let off some heat too. So I don't know if that helps. But it's usually the quick curing ones. I had a 5-minute one and that thing, like you could feel it get hot. Yeah, Valander, you probably can't find brown stuff anymore. Was it Private or Press? Somebody did like a run of it, but it was a limited time run. So yeah, it was easier to follow sand. Babatube 4 says you can get brown stuff from GSW. Okay, so that's Green Stuff World, right? That's funny. Green Stuff World selling brown stuff. Haha. Um, and Green Users is confirming that if you mix Fimo and green, you want a smaller proportion of Fimo than green. And I think you're gonna want to mix your greens separately and then mix the two together because you want to make sure your two parts are thoroughly connected. So this is the kind of thing that we might see with a slot base that is the kind of thing that might detract from presentation, workmanship kind of concerns at Reaper. Assuming that it was still flat like this and I didn't cover it up with gravel or something, which is certainly an easy solution to this problem. So I don't want to glue it in right now, so I'm just faking that. I don't think this one, sometimes it'll do the opposite where it sinks in enough that you get a dip, and almost always you have something like this where there's a part of the slot that this doesn't go into. So if you're really trying to make a nice miniature for a contest, those are issues that you're going to want to look at. If you're doing stuff for gaming, you're going to want to do whatever is most efficient to you. That's interesting. I see a piece of metal in there. I must have just stuck metal in there. I can't believe. Is she a slaughter base? I don't think she's a slaughter base miniature. Where I had another, yeah, this guy. I think I brought this guy over because he has this sinking, but I could be wrong. Apparently I chose a very tight fit plastic bag for this guy. I was doing that so as not to scratch the paint. So it was, can we get a little more light? It was primed black after being assembled, and apparently we cannot see from this angle. Let's try that. That you can still see the lines and stuff. If you painted this pure black and the goal was just to present it as a plain black base, and it was just minor stuff like that, I don't think that would be a huge issue in the painters category. At ReaperCon, I'm just trying to show you some of the problems that are common with base things. Because I know when I started painting, I had more questions about how people were doing all these cool things with bases or making their bases look less crappy than mine than I did about painting. Not that I didn't eventually come up with painting questions, I'm just saying. And then you can have the problem where you want to put a guy that is not on a slot and you just have a bunch of these. And this is a very easy fix. Where did it go? It's a very easy fix if you don't lose the thing you need, which is just tape. Now, if you're going to pour resin or something in there, this may not be enough of a solution. But you just put tape over it, you cut off the excess with a hobby knife, and that's enough of a flat surface to support putting putty and gravel and all that kind of stuff on it. I have done this for many years and never noticed a problem. Do I have an example with me? No, probably not. But probably one of those miniatures I showed you last week, I had done this on. Because back in the day, you could only get these like recessed bases with slots in them because they were from like Privateer Press and other game companies that were selling things with the tabs. Grey Mouser is asking, honestly, if you don't make a nice base, are you going to get any good mark? So I talked about this a bit last week, Grey Mouser. In the painters category at the MSP Open, the base is not a significant part of your score. Like 70% is painting. So your base can detract if you had a lot of problems like, like that, or unpainted basing materials. This isn't quite unpainted, but it kind of, I was going to just throw some on a base to kind of show the problem. Kind of shows the problem, even if the rocks you want are the right color. If we look at this, unfortunately, he's not painted, so it doesn't make the point quite as well. Let's pretend that this guy is there too. This is a tree branch that nature created very well to look like a tree branch. But it's not going to look quite right if everything else on the miniature is painted. And this is true of gravel and sand and stuff. So it not painting basing materials. I mean, you could just do a little bit of washes or highlights or something. You probably don't have to paint that completely. I'm really more talking about like sand and gravel and little rocks and stuff like that. That will limit how high a score you could get in painters, I think. Also because these things are different textures than what appears on either of these miniatures, and so is a tree. It's giving you another opportunity to show your painting ideas and creativity and chops and whatnot. So that is the other reason to paint your basing materials. You can have a perfectly plain base, like I talked about. I only have like 4 miniatures. How am I losing them? I think I talked about this guy. If you just had, like I say, I cleaned up, I painted the base over where I have the mess. That's okay in painters. You can put a plain plinth, you can put it on a plain base, you can put it on a clear flying stand. You don't have to do stuff with the base. It's like if you choose to do stuff with the base, you need to complete the stuff, and so you need to paint it and have reasonable workmanship, or you need to have a plain base. Either of those. So plain base isn't going to detract from your score. If you have some creativity in the base and you're showing painting different textures and stuff, that can add to your score in painters, but it's not going to be super significant because the main consideration is paint. So going all out and making like a super fancy base, you might rather go in diorama, where telling the story and workmanship and stuff like that is a more important, a higher consideration of the score. Valander, GW used to make a display plinth slotted base. It was about 1.5 inches tall with a 28mm wide bottom and 20mm wide top with flutes and ridges. Wow. I guess somehow I missed that. That sounds kind of cool. I've got a few resin plinths that are kind of like columns. Because for a long time, and maybe it still kind of is, I mean, we've got Jacob Jansen that I suspect is going to be at ReaperCon. I haven't checked the little map yet of the vendors. So he makes super cool plinths that you can buy. But for a long time, it was kind of hard for people on the fantasy and sci-fi side to get those neat wooden plinths that you would see, because it would be like old guys that didn't have websites would sell them at the historical shows and stuff. And I was like, well, okay. So if I don't go to one of those, how do I get wood? So that's partly why I'm going over this stuff, is what Grey Mouser said. It's like you can enter with a very basic base. I am the queen of the basic base. I've won gold medals with a basic base. Not this. I did at least, finish it and paint it. But you can also, there are a few little hazards like the tab poking up. And I was going to cut this guy's feet off to show you the floating foot thing, but I think that's kind of obvious. So let's imagine that I had cut his feet off and I put a pin in, and then I want to attach him to one of these bases. And you can do a dry fit test where everything works great before you paint and prime it, and then you're done and you put the guy on and the foot is floating. Like pretend, just imagine this guy's foot is kind of floating up. So it's pinned, but you can see the pin a little, or you can kind of see some air under his foot. And it's just, it takes away from, it removes any sense that it's a figure that gravity is acting on and it lives in a real world and stuff like that. So it kind of just takes people out of the story of your character. And it's pretty easy to fix with some of the things I'm going to show you. You can mix up putty and fix it, but you don't even have to do that. Valander says you can go just to Michael's. Even back in the day, you could get like the wooden cubes, and they have like trophy plaque things, and they're nice, but you don't control the size as much. And I've seen a lot of dioramas that are bigger than they need to be because the piece of wood was dictating the size of the story. We would rather see a not fancy piece of wood and a nice story, that nice compressed action where everything that is in the scene is there because it needs to be. Like, this is a bigger base than this guy needs. I was using this as an example of putties and stuff. I would need to add some stuff. Like, even though I've tried to mix it up, I've tried to do different textures. There's like more of a sand one, more of a rock one. I threw that branch on. I would want to make sure that there are some like grasses, and maybe I've got a little frog that's peeking out. I would want to do something to, like, I'd need to make this base worth the viewer's time at this size. It's not like massively too large, but it's an example of the kind of problem that you'll get with if you're trying to get a piece of wood and you let the base ticket in. So Grey Monster has said something about liquid putty, which, does green stuff still have something they call liquid putty or liquid green stuff? You're probably talking about the Viejo product. Don't get it. Get this. You can get a whole this for, I don't know, 12 bucks, 15 bucks. I haven't bought one lately. They're basically just repackaging this. So this is flexible modeling paste. It also comes in light, I think, lightweight. Golden makes a similar thing. This one is coarse modeling paste. This one is the light modeling paste, which I don't 100% trust for some reason. I don't have their regular molding paste because this is, it's not like I've burned through all of this, but you can, split it up amongst your friends, get some kind of water or, airproof container and split up one of these amongst your friends. It's going to be cheaper in the end than paying Viejo or Games Workshop to split it up and sell it to you. Now, if money is not a problem and you'd rather just buy the simple answer, like, that is cool too. But I'm just letting people know that those are not special products that those guys came up with. They are taking acrylic paint tools that already exist and reselling them. Typically, I like to not leave it in the container. I have worked out of the container, and this got pretty stiff a while back, and maybe it still is. It probably needs more water, but it is kind of like acrylic paint, so I can add water to that. But I am going to have to gunk up a tool, I see. I used to have a little palette knife here, and then I was working on an oil painting, and I actually wanted to use it for, a palette knife. I saw this weird shaped one over on my desk, so I will use that, even though this is, a palette knife is handy for this stuff, and you want one of the ones that's kind of more of a diamond, pointy, long type of thing. This is not the best answer for this. But if I work out of the container, I'm exposing this to a lot of air pointlessly. So this stuff is great for filling the gaps, like I mentioned. You don't have to get out putty. If your join, this guy's arm, if that join was secure and I wasn't worried about structural integrity, this stuff is more than fine to, hold on, I want to get this off before it dries. I mean, I could sand it off later, but as long as it's like acrylic paint, as long as it's hasn't cured, you can kind of get it off with water, which is one thing I didn't bring over was water. We will see if that ends up being a problem. I do have a little dropper bottle somewhere of water. Hopefully that will be enough. So who will get this? Does anyone actually need this one? Because I don't know that this is necessarily the best solution to this problem, but let's pretend that it is. And now I need a smaller delivery tool. Here's where I'm going to use my toothpick, I guess. Grey Mouser said, I think it was for Viejo, but I don't have to use it much. Yeah, I know Viejo does have a plastic putty, and I'm not saying they're all exactly the same formula, because just like everybody's acrylic paint isn't necessarily the same formula, I'm saying they're basically the same thing. Wow, I really have to add water to this, which is weird because I could swear that I had done that. In fact, I'm going to have to add water to it right now so that it functions like it's supposed to function. So what I will do after the show is I'll get that palette knife, and you could use like a tongue depressor or something like that. The handle of an old crappy brush you don't care about. And you just add water to it, the same as if paint started to thicken up. Maybe my container isn't closing as well as it should. That is going to be true of the other ones that I'm going to show you, because so the art stores and the miniature people have this concept, but with texture already added. So you don't have to waste time getting sand or whatever. And this is, and this matte medium is a popular kind of glue. Acrylic paint started as a glue. I mean, you know, you're not going to glue like in that old super glue commercial where the construction worker glues his hat to something and then his hat stays on. You can't glue like that. But gluing simple basing materials with stuff like this or matte medium or gel medium is very much appropriate. So I could glue on the little gravel or leaves or whatever with this stuff. And matte medium is nice for the leaves and things because it's matte, where super glue is shiny and can sometimes show through when you're working over stuff. So this is probably this gel. So this is regular gel semi-gloss. If you go to one of the reasons I like to talk about these is because if you go to the art store, or even Michael's or Joann's has a decent selection of these. I think Golden has like 144 products or something. Part of the variation is, so they have this in semi-gloss, they have it in matte, they have it in gloss. So regular gel refers to the consistency, and then they also have 3 versions because it's going to be different finishes, which if you're a painter, maybe you care about. We're going to paint over this, we do not care. It's probably worth getting gloss in case you want to do an effect where you're not going to paint over it and it's going to be clear. So this is regular. I didn't bring it over because I was running out of hands, but there's like a super thick, and then the kind of matte medium we're used to is like when I'm using, that's Full Improver, you know, when I'm using Reaper's brush on sealer as a substitute for matte medium. So I could stick leaves on with this, but it's just going to run off a base if I try to use it for base. So you do need something thicker for a base. Or Grey Mouse are saying that he used air dry clay recently for gap filling, and it didn't crack or anything when it was done. I think I'd be worried about that. I use an air dry. Well, it's like paper mache. It's like pre-mixed paper mache sort of. And I've made bases out of that, but it is like super crumbly, which is, depending on the texture you're going for, it can work, but it obviously somewhat limits what I can do with the base. You know what, just hold on like 1 second. I'm going to get a little water in here. Because the easiest application tool sometimes is a brush. So I'll just want to be able to get the gunk off the brush if I do that. So I could use this modeling paste, but you can see that it is kind of, you can get some textures with it. You can't really stamp it or sculpt textures exactly, but I could probably take like this one of those plastic brushes they put in kids' paint sets because apparently we hate children. I don't know why they do that to the children. But it's probably a good option for just kind of, you know, if I wanted to make this look a little more like dirt. You can also use sandpaper. But it didn't quite get rid of the, oh, maybe I should not have moved that closer, because now we're getting the glare. It didn't quite get rid of the little, so it smushed down the peak, but you can still kind of see a little, it looks like a smushed down peak instead of looking like dirt. I could thin it more. I think I put that on before I thinned it at all. But I think this gloss stuff is probably going to be a better answer. And that's the other nice thing about these products is until they cure, which at small volumes can be pretty rapidly. You can move them around and get rid of them and stuff. Do I have a junky brush? Close enough. So if I was really determined to get all of this off, and you can see that it's water soluble too, so it's starting to get cloudy because I've now put too much water in for using it as a product. I'm trying to get rid of it. It is not too much water to get rid of it. It was just enough. But let's try this gel stuff instead, because what I really want is the look of like smooth water, right? And even here there's going to be like little ripples. It's not going to be totally smooth, but I can probably work with that, and it's probably going to be more interesting than if it were totally smooth. And I think just like with putty, I can come back after, like I would keep a much closer eye on this, because at the thin applications, it is going to dry surprisingly quickly. This is absolutely the kind of product that I use when I'm on a really tight deadline and I would like to start painting ASAP, because I will have to wait, 4 hours, up to 4 hours for putty. I'm not going to say I've never painted not entirely cured putty, because I totally have. But you do have to wait until it's not so soft that you can move stuff around or add texture with the brush when epoxy putty is at certain stages of cure. And often you don't even have to prime this stuff, since it is essentially like acrylic paint or whatever. Especially, this is going to be a little glossier, but this paste has more than enough tooth to hold paint if you're like super in a rush and you don't want to prime stuff. So this stuff totally existed when I made this miniature, but we did not. There was much less crossover between kind of fine art products and miniature products at that time. So it would never have occurred to me to go down to Michael's or whatever and snag some of this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that actually that little kind of wavy texture is going to make it more, swamp-like. But obviously there are limits to the amount of sculpting you can do with this stuff. I just got some on the miniature. I do want to watch out for that, and that's whatever kind of putty or whatever you're using. You want to make sure that you check for that before it dries, because then it's a lot more of a pain in the butt to get little boo-boos off your miniature. Before I do the next part, I should have taken a picture of this, I guess, before with the crappy base. Well, the crappier base. I'm not saying this is going to be the world's most amazing base or anything. But if I wanted to sit here and keep a really close eye on it, it would probably reach a stage where I could start smoothing out the top more with the damp brush. Even now, I can probably do it a little. But what I think I actually want to do is add turbulence nearer to her. To go with the fog and stuff. Maybe I can kind of even... You can sometimes kind of get a peak on it, like that. And almost draw with it. I think I probably wanted the heavy one instead of the regular. I used to do this with water effects a lot and stuff. And I can kind of add... I kind of extend the fog and make it look... I don't know if you can see that there are little ridges that match. the sculpted base better, so that it doesn't look like a figure I just plunked down in an environment. That is the end goal, is to make the figure and the environment look like they coexist and have always coexisted and that kind of thing. So yeah, if you already have water effects, don't run out and get the just gloss stuff, because you already have what do they call this one? Gel. You already have gel. I mean, the Woodland Scenics actually calls the product water effects. I'm sure that other people make something similar or provide something similar, but they also probably call it something different. But I don't mean like 2-part resin water stuff. This is a 1-part product. And that's kind of the big difference between this and doing like a resin water pour, is you can't get this to look like smooth water. Believe me, I've tried, because I didn't want to deal with resin, 2-part resin, and my attempts were unconvincing at best. So now I kind of want to check for anything that's kind of messing with my illusion or not quite great. And there was a little poking up too much there. There's not enough here, I don't think. Draw it out a little more. And this is definitely look at different angles, because like when I'm looking at it sideways, I can't see the peaks as well. I can't see that I am kind of matching the sculpting a bit, just because it's like shiny and monochromatic. So moving things around can help you get a better view of them. I don't know if I got convincing peaks back here, but we're not going to worry about it too much. And I'm just going to check that I didn't, that this looks like slime or murk or something on the leaves. And if I recall, I said I got some on the figure. Where is that? So that would not look like a smooth join. I don't know if you can see, but there's like a little ridge. So I either need to make the stuff conform better to the shape of what's underneath it, or use the wet brush to rub the stuff off. And if I weren't doing this on camera, I'd probably already be done. This stuff is like a totally feasible thing to work with for quicker bases as well. So I'm going to put her, I'm actually glad I thought of doing the gel instead of the stuff, so I could kind of do the ridges. Because maybe 100 years later, I'll actually paint her and make my whole bulrush idea worthwhile. So I don't know if I am going to end up using this stuff, because I have something different I want to use for him. I'll probably use that for this guy too. I don't think there's anything. I mean, this would be an example of something that's not great workmanship. I don't think anyone would do this, but I only put the gunk on half the miniature. I'm going to use him to put plain gravel on, which is kind of what I'm painting gravel looks like. So I will actually just put this back, since it's now actually more liquid than the rest of the thing in there. So I definitely have to put some water in that. Hopefully I'll remember that later. But now let's talk about what the desert guy equivalent of that would be for this guy. And that is, they make the same kind of thing. They make the pastes and the gels, but they put sand or pumice or other stuff in it. So this is a coarse pumice gel that Golden makes. I do not know if Viejo still makes these, or if they sell it. They still have basing stuff, but they don't look like they're exactly the same products. So I don't know what is comparable that they have now. I think they've got color in them even. So I have sandy paste and white pumice, and then that golden one. coarse pumice. So golden will have fine, probably fine, regular, and coarse. I don't know. They will have a selection of textures. And let's see if we can kind of compare the difference. All three of these are on the wolf, I think. Again, this is where having, you can get a palette knife for like $4 or $5 at most at one of the craft stores. May not be the world's best palette knife, but it's certainly enough for this. This, I think I did put water in, because these have to be at least 12, probably 15 years old. So although it's going to be like, if you buy art store amounts, it's going to seem expensive, it'll last you a long time, or you can divide it up with friends. But you do want to check them every now and then to see if you need to watering. So this is the white pumice. And you can see it's similar to the other thing in that you will get peaks and stuff that you're going to want to check for. And you can like control the appearance of it a bit, but you can't, it's similar to you can't sculpt it like the gel. Like the most you can do is like those little ridges or bumps and craters. Zachariah is pointing out that Liquitex makes these. And yes, pretty much anything that you're going to find in golden, you're going to find in Liquitex. And if you live in a country that doesn't have those products, Australia has Deravan. I think there's another acrylic paint brand that probably has some additives, pastes, texture gels. There's a Canadian brand I'm not remembering either. But if you have a big acrylic art brand, chances are good that they have this stuff, because people use this on canvases to, make shapes and add textures and stuff like that. The like that one, you could add a bunch of stuff before. The gel, you can add these directly to the paint, but you're going to get more with the gels. Like these things, there's enough color or chalk or whatever in it that it's going to make the paint look very washed out. Like it's way more effective use of paint to do this and then put the paint on top of it than to try to make the color from this. When you buy, there are miniature companies that sell these with color in. I think Vallejo actually does sell these with, they're supposed to look like mud and stuff now. And they are probably using more pigment. Like they're probably not just taking some of their acrylic paint and putting it directly in. They're doing a mix where they're going to get a more intense color. And we probably don't have the supplies to do that. So here's an example of not. So this stuff on the side is where I would, kind of get some out and then wipe off my tool. And it's kind of crusty. Like I didn't even try to restore it. But this stuff I added water to, and it's still in great shape. And I clearly have used some of these, because there's such a nice answer to basing compared to having to sculpt everything yourself. And this is how I deal with integral bases a lot of the time, is I just glue it to the base and then use these products on top of it to integrate it, and not have to deal with a bunch of putty and time. And I had one more. I had the coarse pumice, I thought. Oh no, I already put out the coarse pumice. So yeah, an acrylic company might not have all of these. Like maybe they're just going to have pumice texture and they're not going to have all of the pumice textures or whatever. But it's still something. I mean, you need modeling paste. You don't necessarily need all three of the kinds of modeling paste, and you don't need the 17 kinds of gel. You probably just need heavy gel gloss or water effects or something similar. The only reason I have these small, you will not find these in the store. Oops. The golden size is going to be like, this is, my modeling paste is Liquitex. This is going to be like the smallest size that you're going to find these things in. This is the store, my art store near here before COVID, got a lot of representatives from the various companies would come in and they would do demos and they would give us samples and stuff. So these are great. These would be amazing if they sold this. This is like exactly what the size that is suitable for most miniature people, especially if you're just trying it out. Like if you have an army, which this is a figure from Warlord, the Nefsakar before I was like, do I want to file mold lines off mummies for the rest of my life? And I decided that no, I did not. You know, if you're doing an army, you want something like that. They make bigger sizes of this. You might want the bigger size. But if you're just trying this stuff out to see if it works with your process, that is different. Actually, before I put it on the base, let's see how much we can see of the textures just on the camera. Try to move things out of the view. So this was the pumice paste, and it's a pretty fine, hello camera, you were working before, pretty fine grit. This, the sandy paste is a slightly larger grit, and then this stuff is definitely, this is the coarse one from Golden, and it definitely is more coarse. It is coarse enough that I don't think it fits a desert sand guy, and I would use one of these other two. But if I were making dirt, like for this guy, it would be excellent. And I'm pretty sure, in fact, that this is the coarse pumice paste right here. This is the one in the middle, the sandy one. And I may not have used the fine on this one. But even if you're making a big base like this, or a big display base, it's nice to have those different textures. Even if you don't end up painting it very differently, it still adds some visual variety. Here's an example of not getting the peaks out of the modeling paste. But I bet I could just smush those or take an X-Acto to them or something. If I had my reasonably sized or reasonably shaped and sized palette knife right now, that would help. I had to go down and get my visor too, because the oil painting I'm working on, the guy I take classes with is like Mr. Super Detail guy, so I do end up having to put on my visor and use Kolinsky brushes. I'm working on like a 14 by 16 or something painting, and I'm wearing my visor and using Kolinsky brushes, so I'm not sure exactly how it's supposed to be like different from what I do the rest of the time, but it kind of is. So these things are great. I love them. That again is the kind of thing that I would use to solve the integral base problem. Let's see. I'm just catching up because there's a lot of good tips here in the chat. Greymaster has all the fancy wood he would need in his backyard or at his son's house. Thinks it was 10 for Viejo. I don't know what that means. Use dry clay. No. Oh, the fancy metal Battletech mix minis, which were going in inset metal hex bases, so I used it as a gap filler with the hex base, and then I'm putting something on top so cracking doesn't matter. Yeah, that does seem effective then, if you're going to go on top of stuff. Or you want to make craft earth. I used the thing that cracks for, like, I did a interior of a mummy's tomb type thing, and it made the right kind of ground type texture. Taka Flaka Flame can't find their golden pumice gels, but knows they will find them immediately if they buy new ones. Yeah, that's how I do it. There was something very recently I did that with too, and I was like, dang it, why? Or like I'll keep something for 20 years and then finally be like, you know what, this can go to Goodwill. I'm clearly never going to use it. And 2 weeks later is when I'm like, finally, the moment to use that is here, and I don't have it anymore. Dang. So since I want this to be fine desert sand, I would probably go with this brush. I mean, this, the finest of my pumice options. And it will look so much nicer. I think I probably didn't do anything about this base at the time because all I knew about was gravel, and I wanted something finer because I'm like, well, that doesn't really look like sand. How am I going to make it look like sand? I'm going to say that was my excuse. Or I was like halfway through making the base when I had my realization about my lack of desire to deal with mummy mold lines. And just was like, nope, you can go on the shelf. You can build this stuff up and work over it if you needed to build up thicknesses. I would probably just put putty or cork or something underneath to kind of get the elevation changes that I wanted if I wanted something extreme. So you can do kind of minor stuff with this. Let's do an example here, maybe. Do it on the front since he's got his little scarab friend on the back. So I can make it kind of like there's a little bump in the sand here. It is at a slightly different elevation than other parts of the sand. I have had this out long enough that it is starting to get a little thicker. Mix some water in. And you can see just a little water can make it actually quite different. I maybe put too much, but depending on what I wanted to do, if I wanted this to be fairly flat, the more water would be good. I can come back and get that off his feet in a minute. And I might want a toothpick. Kind of shove some in between this bandage and his foot. And again, depending on what you're making this for, if I was making this for an army, would I care if it didn't 100% look like sand texture right in there? I would not, because if you're looking that close, well, you get what you get. You're supposed to be looking at all the guys together as an impressive rank, of force, not checking for sand gaps on one guy's base. So, I mean, since I did take the mold lines off this guy, and now he's going to have a less stupid base, maybe I will paint him. Maybe I should save him for Halloween, because I love his little scarab buddy. I got out of the habit of putting buddies on things. I used to put buddies on most of my miniatures. I think I need to go back to doing that because I just have a super huge extensive collection of little familiars and companion animals and decorative animals, and basically if it's a tiny animal I could easily be convinced to buy it. I think I once paid like $20 for like 4 tiny little Japanese cats just because I'm like, they're cool. And I get that it was an import, so that's why it's expensive, but I feel like I must have these tiny cats. Right, so before I put that guy aside, I want to do my check for did I gunk up his bandages with, oh, and did I even get all the mold lines? I really didn't. Long ago me was very careless. Long ago me was at least as tired as I am now, I guess, probably. So that's a weird, clumpy, unattractive look. I'll make sure I'm not covering up any of this guy's legs. But also make sure that I covered up where I had to mangle off his base. But there I am covering up the leg. Definitely don't do this with like your favorite brush. Like you probably can't get this stuff out. It is similar to acrylic paint. It should rinse out. I'm pretty sure my master's stuff will work. My master's brush cleaner and restorer will work on it even if a little bit gets dry. But it also is, it's got literal sand and rocks in it. It's going to be rough on the bristles, so I don't want to be doing this to my favorite brush. Now, since this is desert sand, I don't want it to be too, I don't know, it seems like it should be fairly smooth. Like desert sand isn't flat glass like surface or something, but it's not like earth where it's going to have little peaks and valleys and stuff like that as much. Be larger. Smoother elevation changes. Or I should go research before I make all of these claims. Because you know I like to do more research. But then the other thing I would want to do, and what tool do I have that would be good for this? A wax knife will probably be good, but I have this right here, so. Sakurai, those aren't mold lines, they're bandages beneath the bandages. Excellent. When I'm doing smooth sand, I water it down more so it settles flatter. Yeah, I think this stuff, when I added a lot more water, is better. It also didn't dry so fast that this is going to be annoying. Nope, that was a terrible tool for that. An X-Acto knife would probably be better. I just wanted to clean up the edge a little. But that's okay. We'll just get that out and call it good. And I'm pretty sure that I will be fine to paint this without worrying about the fact that everything else is primed, and that is not. Everything else is metal and needs the prime for the paint to stick, but this should be fine. Then the real trick, just like with sculpting, is not to poke your finger in it before it finishes. So we're going to put that over by the Banshee lady and not touch it. So those are the sanding pastes, and again, you don't need all of them. And if they're in decent shape, I would put them back in the container, but I'm not going to this time. I don't want stuff to dry out. All right. So let me put some gravel on this guy before I do something else, just to kind of give a demonstration. I mean, it would work best if I had a painted miniature. Maybe I'll do it on this guy. So the deal with this guy, which I painted on stream, one Valentine's Day, I painted pink colors, and then I think I had to finish them up later because I mainly worked on a princess's dress, but then these two guys were part of that stream, but then I worked on them more later. His base has like more detail than I feel like painting for this minute. Like, this would be a game miniature for me, and I am not invested in figuring out exactly which parts of this are skeleton, and I'm just not. Plus, it also was a good example, and a good opportunity to show more basing materials. In fact, I was gonna put them on one of these plastic bases, but I don't think I have to. I think I just need to put him on a holder. Fingerprints do make it more personal, but if you wipe out all the texture and then it doesn't look like sand anymore, that's not great. So that is what I would want to avoid, is ruining something. And I've totally done it. I don't think you can sculpt more than two things, or make more than two things with this kind of paste until you have one where you mess it up with your hands somehow, or you like drop something on it, or you're trying to fix one thing and you don't realize that you're poking your finger or your tool into some other area that you were done with, which is one reason to work in stages. It's like, okay, that part is done and it looks good. Why don't I just stop touching it, let that cure, and then do whatever the next step is? But now my plan seems messy. All right, we're not sticking them down yet. There's yet another use for these. I have some foam plates, paper plates, bowls. There's all kinds of answers to this problem, but when you start working with the loose gravel and stuff, it's going to get places, and it's convenient if you can gather it up and put it back because it's less wasteful and also makes cleaning up your space easier. So I wanted to try to clean it out. Now I just want to make some space. And here's where the downside of recycling containers to be things is, because I do not know what's what in here. So that's some gravel. I'll keep that one. That is some smaller gravel, and it's a different color, so we'll keep that one. This is not gravel. These are rocks. They're going to be too big to use on his base. I don't know if he needs rocks because he's kind of standing on a rock. But, so these are actually... I kept the packaging. These are Woodland Scenics Talus Rock Debris. One of the things that's nice about these is they're very light and they're not real rock. It's plaster or something. So you can break them up. You can sand the edge. You can sand it down so that one part looks, attaches flat to the base. So even though it seems dumb to buy rocks when rocks exist, this is why I bought rocks. They're very convenient and easy to work with, rocks. But if you like pre-made smaller rocks, go to the... these are actually ground up seashells, I think, but they will look like rocks on a base. Look in the flower section, I think, of the craft stores, like the flower arranging section, or aquarium stores is probably another place to look for stuff like this. So that's like kind of little ones, little shale type ones. And these are just things where you can add some visual variety to a base by tossing things like that on there. This is larger. This is also Woodland Scenics. At the time, all their stuff came in like little plastic bags, so that's why eventually... Okay, that was dumb. This is tea. This is tea that I have made into a drink and then dried out and saved. I think this one was in bags. Sometimes I drink loose leaf tea, but I think this one was in bags, so I would just put the bag aside until it was dry and then cut it out and put it in here. And this is nice because you can put it over the dirt. And I didn't end up doing it on this guy, so let's just toss a little on this guy now. We'll use some of that medium stuff. And so it looks more natural. It's like, what do you call that stuff? Detritus? Is it detritus? It's kind of like the buildup of gunk on the forest floor. It looks like that. And you could even, I usually put it on before I prime, but I think it'd be possible to put this on and then just paint it, like you could dry brush it a little or something to wash it to add a little variety. No Time for Bull is asking whether I have any blog posts about when and when not to line something. I do not. I do want to have a more comprehensive post on lining. I cannot think of a lot of examples where I wouldn't. What I do is change the degree of contrast on the lining. So let me go actually get a guy that I was working on recently on stream. Or the width of the line. So if you look at some areas on this rocky, the lining looks more like lining. Like it just looks like I drew a line. And then on the other side, I used a slightly lighter value and I worked it in a little differently. I made a thinner line or a thicker line sometimes to make it look more natural. So as another example of that, if I were lining this guy, which I didn't because this is experimenting with like one coat colors that, you put it over white and it's supposed to do all the work for you. Lining would be a way to, actually, I think I probably did line around there. Add just a little bit of polish to it. But if I were lining this, I'd be using a fairly dark color, like around here. I mean, I'd probably be using blue liner. I probably did use blue liner. Use some there. But in between his fingers, I would want an effect more like this, where I would use a slightly darker color. Probably the darkest shade color that I used on the skin or something, because it's not a really deep crevice. It should look a little more subtle. So very rarely would I say don't line something, especially if it looks like it needs definition. Or, if I start putting it over here, if you can't tell anymore, kind of thing. But you may want a thinner line, or you may want a lighter line, or you may want a lighter and a thinner line, depending on what you're lining between. So sometimes you're going to want it to be more subtle, and other times you're going to be like, I can't get a color dark enough to make the line that I want. Like even the darkest color you have, it dries and then it's like it doesn't look as dark as you want it. So that is what I control. And there is a post about that. What would you search for? Search for Hydra. So I've got a couple of different posts about painting Julie's Hydra. And in one of them, I was working on the scales, and I have some pictures of kind of before and after lining. And when I lined that, I used 3 or 4 different values of lining. So it's where there's more highlights on the scales, the lining is a lighter value. Where the scales are going into shadow and overall they're darker, the lining is a darker value. And I think there's a picture in the post with the lining mixes that I used. So it's not that I get one color and that goes all over the miniature. Again, depending on, if it's a gaming miniature, maybe I'm going to do that. And then maybe at the end, if I want to go in between the fingers, I'll just add a little more water and then I have a lighter version of that. But that was something that I was painting to a display level and kind of challenging myself. I don't paint a lot of monsters, so I was kind of challenging myself and trying to see how it would work. So I did that. And then sometimes I might, like 2 might have been enough. Maybe I only needed 2 values. So this is actually, I don't even have to make a mix of those 3 things I just showed you, because this is my little bucket that's a mix. But if I didn't have that, I could use, a spoon is a great tool to have. So I could use those other ones and just kind of pour it over there and catch the excess in here. But instead, we're going to do it the other way. I'm going to put the glue on the guy. Now I have too many of these and I've lost. I had the one that was, I put all the pastes on. What did I do with that? Well, we'll never know, I guess. I don't know how, I lose stuff at my desk and it is amazing to me. There was one time, so I often paint the Christmas miniatures for Reaper. Well, the 12 days, they're not all Christmassy. And there was one that was like a winter fairy. I think she has like a name, like a first name as well, but I can't remember. And she had little wings, and they were, you had to glue the wings on. And I had the wings on my desk. I prepped them up and everything. And I got to the point where it was time to glue the wings on. And I found one of them, and I couldn't find the other one. I'm like, I have not left this desk. I've not moved anything around. I had those wings. I'm painting. Now I don't have the wing. Like Ron had to send me another wing. 6 months later or something, I picked up I had this little foam stand that I would put my iPhone on to look at reference pictures or play music or whatever. And I was tidying up my desk and I lifted it up and I went and it was under the thing. So it never did leave my desk. It really did not. I hadn't knocked it on the floor or whatever. It stuck to something on my desk. But I was very annoyed about that. All right. Well, possibly if you can't get the lid off your super glue, that super glue is done. So this is a situation where I do like to use super glue because it's quicker and I'm going to be painting this, so it doesn't matter to me that there is shininess. And I'm using a lot, so I'm gunking it on instead of, normally I would put super glue on here and then use a toothpick. I may still use a toothpick. Actually, I did not want to put that there. Well, let's see. Maybe I can kind of shove it more into the inside. I think I'd rather use the pastes over these parts that are already quite raised. But I wanted to add some gravel around the part, like it's very flat right there. I wanted to add some gravel there, and we can add a little bit there too. So I'm not going to have quite as much control, and I wouldn't say I had like a massive amount of control with the texture paste, sand paste and stuff. But this is even less. Like, you know, I can control where I'm putting the glue. I can't necessarily control what happens after that. I can wait for it to dry. If I need to build it up, I need it to be thicker. I can wait for it to dry and then do another thing, which I often do. That's why I like to do it with super glue instead of white glue, because I'm impatient. But you can, after, you know, because the super glue doesn't dry like immediately, go through and get the ones that are like hanging off the base, or if they're just poking up and they're looking weird, which sometimes happens. But that's the kind of thing when I was talking about, you know, workmanship or attention to detail, just taking that moment to get the extra ones off. And if I didn't do it now, I could come back with an X-Acto knife probably and pop them off. But it is easier to do at the time. And maybe that looks dumb, so I'll get rid of that. And then I will come back and use those sand pastes to kind of cover up the rest of the skeleton and give it a little more texture variety. But this is what I'm talking about with, you paint the stuff as well as the figure. So let's say that I thought he lived in an environment where he had, you know, a mix of brown and beige, you know, rocky scree or something. It just doesn't look right. Like, even if that is literally the exact color I want it to be, which I wouldn't, because I feel like it is contrasting in an unpleasant way with the pink. But let's just say that I did want that. It doesn't look right. It looks toy-like compared to the guy. Because just like we have to paint the shot, you know, I had to do a wash to get those ridges to show on the paint. I'm going to have to do a wash to make natural, you know, shadows that look natural compared to him on all this gravel crap. So that is a very common thing that we see with newer painters, that they just are like, okay, I got a rock that's the right rock color. I don't have to do anything to it. And then we will tell them, if they ask for feedback after the contest, we'll mention. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to make the difference between, you know, you got a certificate of merit and a gold medal. It's not like that. But there is a point at which, if you're like totally ignoring kind of workmanship and base painting and stuff like that, I myself, and I think I've asked other judges and they agreed, I would be reluctant to go past bronze if you're not also doing that stuff, because this is in painter's category, because it's something to paint as well. Like, it's a totally different texture than this guy. It's not going to be like a slimy, mucus covered whatever. It's going to be dry, dusty, or muddy, or whatever dirt. It's totally different texture, different colors. I'm showing skills. Bill Robertson, I saw that title and thought Bones versus Hydra. And Quinty said, a fight for the ages. I feel like that's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. You want to bring something more than rocks to your Hydra fight. At least if it were me. If my party, if I know I'm facing a Hydra, I think I'm going to be like, let's go get something better than rocks to do this. All right, who else's base is here? Now this, I'll just show this one in case it's showing in the background. I did not sculpt this. This is Michael Proctor, because he is 1 bazillion times better at bases than I am. So I'm kind of showing how remedial people like me do bases. If you're already good at that, go look at Michael's things, and he does a lot of construction now with styrene plastic and stuff like that. And he just like whipped this up real quick. This was a figure I was going to paint to use in one of, like, in an RPG game we were going to have, and then I'm not sure what happened. If I ended up, I think somebody asked me to kind of go over something I had talked about in a class, or if I ended up like playing a different character or something like that. Do I have any idea if Reaper Errant will ever come back? At this point, I have not heard any news, and I am sad about that. I think that, Frank is still doesn't have the kind of internet that he would need to make it happen, I believe is the issue. I think he's done testing. I don't know if he hasn't done testing with us, but the problem is that the way he did it, he would, like, all of us would stream to Frank. So that was like 5 or 6 people. And then he streamed back out. So it was all of our streams plus his video stream. So he needed pretty high input as well as high output to be able to do it. But I'm very sad because I would love for Reaper Aaron to come back. I had a ton of fun, and I would like to have a ton of fun again. I mean, Frank is such a good DM, and I like hanging out with my friends and stuff. But alas, to my knowledge, it is not happening anytime soon. All right, what did I put in here? I know I looked earlier. You guys can laugh at me. Right, so this is bark. These are very small pieces of bark. If you look at Michael Proctor's bases, his bigger bases are often on bigger pieces of bark. So back in the day, everyone used to use cork, which I have some examples of. And cork is nice because it's, cheap and fairly easy to work with. But it's, you see how flat the top is. And even if you start piling one on top of the other, you then have to do some stuff to make it not look like cork. Like I'd have to use some of that modeling paste or sand or something to put in that join so that I can't automatically see or, immediately see that it's 2 pieces of cork stuck together. And I also have to do something up here. But that doesn't mean cork isn't worth getting. And like this one's kind of neat because if you rip this up, you get sort of like little rocks that are neat too. I have no idea where I got that one. I wish I did because it's cool. So cork had its place, or its day, maybe. And there are probably still times when I would use a little cork. But after a while, everyone was using cork, and it started to get really easy to tell if it was cork, if people hadn't taken a lot of time and effort. And these kinds of chips of bark that, Michael lives in the wilderness, so he goes and gets his own. But I think you can get stuff like this at the hardware store that you're supposed to put in your garden or something, apparently. I don't know. But I keep the little bits because if I just need to add, like, maybe I could have added a little cliff to this guy or something. A little escarpment. That's what I use these for. And then even just all the gunk, where once you start, whatever container you keep it in, you're going to get a bunch of gunk like this. That is more stuff that is great to add, sprinkle in spots over whether you use gravel or those pastes as forest detritus type stuff. So that's kind of what this is, almost scatter, and then some of these are just little pieces of rocks. Interesting, that one, I thought that was a rock for a minute, but the other side, it is bark. I have some bark of my own from, we had a big tree limb that fell, but I think Michael has different kinds of trees where he lives, and they have way more interesting bark. The bark that I had it's very uniform. So I've used it, but it's not great. Tarzan 2319 has seen people using actual rock slate when they break it down super small and become flat shale, essentially utilizing things like this. My problem with real rock is that, and I'm not saying it's terrible to do that, but it is real rock, so it's hard to break it up or shave it if you've got a little part poking out over the edge of your base, and then you're like, oh, that's going to mess up my carrying case or whatever. I could still shave that off if it was bark, but little rocks are the easiest answer for putting little rocks on bases from the aquarium store or like the flower arranging section. I thought I had another example of little rocks. Yeah, these are probably aquarium store ones. I didn't buy all of these. I bought a lot of this stuff, but they're, I had a friend of a friend who had collected like a lot of little packets of various things from the hobby stores and the craft stores that you could use for bases, and so I inherited some of them. So some of these I bought, and I bought all the Woodland Scenic stuff, I'm pretty sure. And then some of the little rocks and things I don't have. These are, I think Gale Force 9 had, well, I thought theirs was different. But they had like flat pieces of stone that were nice if you're kind of doing like pavement, broken pavements and stuff like that. And I think I was just keeping the bits. But yes, this one looks more, this looks more like that stuff. And these are just the little bits. You get bigger sheets and that. So if you've seen people doing more superhero type stuff, they're probably using those. So good question on what these are. Maybe I did use some air dry clay or something. I just kept the little bits. I keep stuff like this. Like these are metal shavings from filing metal miniatures. And I haven't used this yet, but there may one day be a reason to use this, and then I will have it. But Robertson 42 is thinking that Gale Force 9's flat stone looking things were great, and I think you're right. That's why I don't think that was that. This looks like I put epoxy sculpt on it and then did a press mold. Can I remember why? Maybe it was that tomb thing. I don't know. This is not that paper mache stuff, though, because that was also gray. It's entirely possible that a friend just gave me, like, a small sampling of those. One of the things last week I showed, I had made mushrooms out of pins, which I brought some pins over in case I want to do that. And no one guessed what these were. These were on the little goblin with the racing pigs. They're cloves. These particular cloves also came out of tea. I think I have a chai blend that had cloves, and I would pick them out after I finished steeping the tea and save the cloves. I mean, cloves are one of those things that they look like cloves. It's hard to disguise. It worked on that particular base, but I don't know that I'd be putting on every kind of woodland base that I ever had. And then the moss beard and the other lady that I had mushrooms on, I made extra mushrooms when I did that. And I almost always, if I have to sculpt or construct something, make at least two. So one might turn out better, I might lose one, I might break one, and then I don't have to go do it again. Even for painting, like when I paint, those little fern leaves. This is that brush etch stuff that I mentioned. So you can see kind of before and after. So this is very fine brass. And it comes in sheets where it's flat like that. And then you can take it. Sometimes it's easier to paint it on the sheet. But it's one of those things. It's not going to look super natural unless you put some effort into it. So you got to kind of curl the leaf. You got to make some of these fronds. And it's possible you want to do this stuff before painting because you're just going to scratch off paint if you're doing it after painting. So that's why those ones are on there. And then I cut them off there and assemble it so it looks like a fern. They also have ones that are like more like tree branches or something. And you can see a little bit of the brass shining through on that one. There are lots of other kinds. You can get some that are like sigils and stuff like that as well. If you wanted to like apply a relief to a shield, they have like that kind of thing. But most of the stuff like that is for 54mm scale miniatures. Or plants, even if someone intended that to be for 54 scale miniatures, it's like, well, I intend it to be for whatever I want to put it on, so that is fine. But yeah, where did I put my putty? Because maybe we could make a mushroom. There it is. Except this stuff is almost too hard. Oh, wow. Maybe my epoxy sculpt's getting old. I am actually pretty bad about my putties. None of those putties I showed you. Well, no, the Procreate I keep in the freezer. I don't keep my epoxy sculpt in the freezer. It is pretty sturdy stuff, and since I'm just using it for bases, it has to get pretty crap before I give up on it. So where are my little pins? I think I had 2 different sizes of pins. This is like a terrible box to put pins in because you pop that lid off and they go everywhere. So I had 2 sizes of these, I think. So some of the pins that I used on the mushroom guy were just straight out of the box like this and painted, but I tried to distress the stems a little. Those appear to be the exact same size to me. Maybe I used all of the other size. It seems improbable. I'm going to stop poking myself and start using this instead. But you can buy these in different sizes. These are like straight pins. These are going to be in the sewing section. That looks thin. Okay, that one's got like a little teardrop shape on it. And I'm sure it's in the sewing section, but I don't recall buying those. That seems like something that I acquired at some point. Is this one smaller? I swear I had smaller and bigger versions of these, but I do not appear to anymore. That sounds like an excuse to go to Michael's right there. All right, so where I did this with green stuff, and I might advise that again. The downside of this stuff not being as sticky is that it's not as sticky. So a lot of the time when you're doing things on bases, it is very nice to have it not be as sticky. But if you're trying to do like I want it to stick to the metal, and it's not gonna. So this is far from a perfect mushroom cap. So I think I probably want to get it, well, now it's a disappearing mushroom cap. I probably want to get it fairly round and then flatten that thing into it, or even just a little bit flat. But I suspect that green stuff will work better. I might not do this on wood. I might prefer to do it on a piece of plastic because it'll pop off better at the end. But that, you get the basic idea. You can expand it and make more of a variety of size of mushrooms. Because like all the other stuff I'm showing you, like if all the gravel is the same size and all the rocks are the same size, it doesn't look realistic. So mixing up the size of the mushroom caps will give you a better look. This putty is probably too old to be doing this. But I also did cone ones. And those are pretty easy too. You know, in an ideal world, you don't cover your surface with sand and leaves and stuff and then try to sculpt things in putty, because that's absolutely the wrong order to do that in. So basically, you just you want a tube and you're just making it narrower at one end. It's possible that I did just use wire or something for this kind of cap, so that I didn't have to worry about embedding the whole head of the pin. I suspect that is, I either used this side of the pin, or I used more flexible wire. And with a real sculpting tool that I do have, I just didn't get them out. In fact, I will show you guys this, because so back in the day, when you got color clay shapers, they cost a fortune. So you bought very few, and now you can get like something like this for like 12 bucks on Amazon. Which, I mean, you know, it's because of Chinese knockoffs, which is not always a good thing, because I do think the people who innovate stuff should be able to, you know, make a living off being innovative. But it had been so long, and I bought plenty of these off them. I use them for oil pastels as well, so that set I wanted for oil pastels. Because those don't seem like two things that should mix, green stuff and whatnot, and oil pastels. I don't want to get oil. And that kind of oil never, it's mineral oil, it never sets. It's not like oil paint, which is a drying oil. Mineral oil is a non-drying oil. Wow. Maybe we are starting to understand why I don't make basing stuff more often, because apparently I've become even more clumsy than I thought. It is so covered with stuff from my very messy thing. But it is possible to use something flat like that to kind of make the bottom look a little nicer. But it's worth looking up different kinds of mushrooms, because you might find ideas for other mushrooms that would be easy to do as variations on that theme. But they're slightly different shapes. And I remembered something and then I forgot it. Right, these. So apart from like sculpting type tools and the materials and stuff, I would say these are something that I love in basing that people may not think about. So these are like, I think they do call it reverse tweezers. So in regular tweezers, you push to hold the thing. And these are handy for basing as well. Picking up those little rocks and putting them down in your paste or whatever. I'm trying to get stuff that the camera might be distracted by out of the way. For putting those, once the mushrooms are made, I want to put them in the base. That might be handy to use. And these specific ones, these let you get in some places that you can't otherwise. Go look in the jewelry section, which I don't think that the jewelry section didn't have as much variety when I first started out. So this is an X-Acto one. Squadron probably makes these too. So my initial bunch of these I got at like Hobbytown. But then later someone said something about, go look at jewelry ones. And you can see how very reasonable in size to miniature concerns these are. And the little curve lets you get in. I could put leaves in different places. Maybe I will try doing a leaf in a minute. But the reverse ones are like a third hand, essentially. So I get my pen, and if I'd remembered about this originally, I would be struggling less maybe. And then, I wouldn't have to touch the pin at all to be making the mushroom cap. Or when I glue together, I don't think I have a glued together bouquet, but I've glued together little bouquets with dried flowers and stuff. And I would have this hold it, and then I'm using the little tiny tweezers to add another leaf or whatever. And these ones stand up, which is nice. Actually, I think these ones stand up too. And they may be jewelry store ones as well. And they don't have as much texture, because sometimes you want the grippy texture, sometimes you don't. But these stand up a little more like that, and that can be nice because it's, I don't have to worry about the other side touching the surface either. So these are very handy for basing stuff. Oh, here are my other needle nose. So flat needle nose are good too, but if I only had to get one, I'd probably get the little curved ones. But I would definitely get a set of these. I don't think I've ever used them for like making a miniature, but for base stuff, I absolutely have used these and find them very handy. I didn't remember about it, but that is how I did those mushrooms with less pain, I think. So where are we time-wise? We're pretty close. Was there something I was going to show that I didn't show? Oh, I talked about putting leaves on things. So there's various kinds of leaves. There are something called birch pods that do come from birch trees, I believe. And they look like, where are tiny tweezers? They look like these things. These, I think you do need, like you will need to look in a miniature hobby store. You're not going to find those at Joann's or Michael's. Oh, these are some of the flowers I put together. So like this flower is made from 3 separate leaves and a flower. And I had to glue it all together. And then these bouquets is a similar thing. This is a bunch of little leaves, and then one of them I wrapped a thread around. I think these are just glued. This one, yeah, I think I wrapped a thread around to make it look like a tied bouquet. If you can just kind of see the thread where the stems join. And then there was a big rose, I think. That I didn't know I had one of these. I could glue it. This is the good thing about making extras. The base that I made this for, I guess this was probably the reject flower, but the real flower has since fallen off and gotten lost, so I could glue that back on. These are actually, and this is going to be so small, I don't even know if it's going to show up on camera. This is, I want to say Knock, N-O-C-K, is they make like model railroad stuff. I think they're a European brand for model railroad stuff. And these are like little tiny plastic roses. And they really are tiny. I mean, I don't think I ever end up using it. The thing I was trying it for, that I made the flower, I needed you to be able to see the flower. Like it wasn't a background filler thing to add a little variety to a base. It was kind of like part of the point of the story. So I painted up this one and the other one, and then I put this on the base, and it's like, well, you cannot, it's like, this is a little tiny cobalt, and it's barely significant on his base. So I would probably use these more, sticking them in a row to be like a little garden or a little meadow, some detail in a meadow. But to be flowers that people notice, they definitely flunked that. They have grass stalks or corn. They have corn stalks that look really cool. And they have some other stuff too, I think. And then there's this store online, Scenic Express. If little tiny vegetation and grass tufts and mats and all that stuff is your jam, your wallet is about to regret that I told you to go to scenicexpress.com. Like they have these like little tiny cabbages and stuff, and I forced myself to not buy them until I come up with a scene that needs them. But it was tough. It was tough not to just go buy little tiny cabbages because they were cute. So these, I got distracted from my original purpose, which was telling you about the birch seed pods. They seem to be easier to find at sometimes than others. But you look for like leaf scatter on miniatures focus sites. And you can try the historical sites like mishtoy.com and some other ones like that. They may be more likely to have them. You can see they vary in size considerably too. So this might only be feasible on a 54 millimeter or bigger base. So those are options for leaves. James Wapo used to use this stuff, so it was a different Viejo product. What did they call it? I think they called it something mica, but it was like the paste that had flakes of mica in it. And it was super cool, and he would use it for leaves. I'm sure you were supposed to do something else with it, but the problem is it dries out really fast. Like so fast that you may not keep your eye on it to add the water, like way faster than those other things. I even bought another container of it, and then that one dried out before I could do it. But then I found you can just buy mica flakes, and I'm like, well, what we're using it for is leaves. Like, I can supply the paste later. I'll just do mica flakes. I probably want to cut these up with like a little well, no, cutting up isn't going to look right, is it? I'm not saying I've completely worked all the bugs out of this mica flake idea, but Because it's where you want like kind of leaf scatter, but it doesn't necessarily automatically look like leaves. You're just gonna kind of paint it like a pile of things instead of here's this one art. These are great for here's some artful leaves that fell and are accenting my figure's base. This is better for it's like here's a pile of leaves that fell off that tree kind of deal. So let's put some on this guy. And this I think is a job for the matte medium or similar paste. It wouldn't even need to be as thick as this one. But this is the one I have. So. Well, that's not entirely true because, like I said, I have brush on sealer. So let's try some brush on sealer too. Right after I poke a hole in the lid. That may be too much, but it's like paint. You can just get rid of the excess. And it's matte, so then I would take my tiny tweezers get a couple of these artful leaves. I have more of these somewhere, but I don't. This isn't even all of my weird basin collection of stuff. This is the stuff that I found and unpacked and brought upstairs. Somewhere there is another whole collection of weirdness. Way back in the day, there was some company that I think was one of the main companies people that knew of that was selling this stuff, and they only did it occasionally because mainly they worked on scenic stuff for movies, so they would just kind of do that as a sideline when they weren't making movies. Oh, these ones, I didn't even realize these were in here. You can, there's like little cutout things you can get. I think Green Stuff World has them, but they may not be the only ones. And you get paper or you use real leaves and stamp out your own leaves. So let's throw one of those on his base too. And then what else will we give him? Clearly I haven't been making bases enough lately because it's like I've forgotten all of these things. But I'll give a little pile of leaves. Kind of beside the tree, maybe? Yeah, like the wind. Okay, that was way too much of that. In fact, it was so much too much of that. Let's get just a paper towel. This is why I often put things in another place and then put them over here instead of doing it the quick way. Just try to make sure they're actually contacting the gunk, and I'm not sure that they all are because I probably took too much of the gunk off in the end, but I can always come back and do another coat. And I think one of those other leaves escaped. So I'll just put it on top of that pile to help sell the idea that it's a leaf pile. Now some of those, the birch pods and the little leaves you can stamp out. I would probably put those on after, you know, priming and painting and all that stuff. In the end, I think I took off too much gunk. But anyway, you get the idea. Poor Test Wolf here. One day, I will finish his base and paint him. But it appears that that day is not today. This leaf is not attached. So those are some little cool base ideas or products that make some jobs easier, I find, at least, that I thought I would show you. I did not get to the turkey leg. Maybe I'll do that next week. We'll see. I'm hoping to start doing some of the, where I go through and talk about problems and then how I would fix it. Like this guy isn't technically finished, but I kind of want to leave him here as an example because he was supposed to look like the Dungeons and Dragons movie Owlbear, and then I forgot the part where the Dungeons and Dragons Owlbear has, from the movie, has like little markings, and I never put those on here. But there's something I want to fix before then. I did want to give him another base, just for stability, I guess, if nothing else. But we didn't get there, so maybe I'll do another basing one. And my turkey leg, we'll do one that's a little more sculpty or something. But yeah, I didn't get any questions about my ReaperCon, my MSP Open stuff yesterday, last week. But if you, okay, I didn't touch anything. That's super weird. But if you think of some later or questions about this stuff, feel free to let me know. I had this toothbrush here. I kind of liked it. I hadn't used this kid's plastic paintbrush before, and I think I like it better because it's smaller. You can get it where you want it. But that was the idea with the toothbrush, was just kind of adding a little bit of variation and texture to those pastes. So I think I showed you all the things I meant to show you. Just kind of surveying the carnage. Oh, well, last week I showed you several pieces. Hey, Pendrick. Where I had used beads. And then this is kind of what they look like when you get them. So I think this was one of the beads I used for a basket on that one lady, or it's similar to, if not. These were the beads that I used at the bottom of the columns of the wedding scene, the chuppah, at the wedding scene. This would be like great for flowers or sheaves of wheat or something like that. I haven't used this one yet, but that's why I got that one. Some of these are plastic, and I don't like the plastic ones quite as much because they have mold lines, and then it's harder to get the mold lines off than it is the metal ones. So whenever I go in the craft store, I always stop and look at the bead section. There's that. I use one of these in the bowl on the priestess offering piece with the little stairs. I definitely use one of those. Have I used enough of them to justify the amount of them that I've purchased? Maybe not. Might have used one of those as a bowl. I don't think I ended up using that one. I don't think it fit that lady the way I wanted. But yes, some of them are actually findings instead of beads. They go at the end of necklaces or something like that. But there are metal ones. You only get like 2 or 4 or something of the metal ones in a package, but that is fine. These gold plastic ones, that came in like a big package with a whole bunch of them. This is very much a subset of those. I mean, this is probably a subset of all of them, because I used to have the little drawer organizer thing like you put in a shop for different sizes of screws and stuff. And then when I changed my studio setup, I'm like, well, that thing is taking up a lot of space for holding beads and a few other things that I don't actually use that often, so why don't I compress those and keep the spares somewhere else? But anyway, that is probably enough of that. It seems like a lot of you already knew about some of these things, but just in case, I know that we have people who watch later or who watch on YouTube. And if you're newer painters, you just started with the Learn to Paint kits, because you might be here because this is beyond the kit of the Learn to Paint kits. You may be starting to wonder how people do all these cool base things, and now you have some answers. I see that Valander was also asking about the crow's nest. I haven't heard anything lately. I should ask Michael about that. Sometimes Quindy has more news about those things than I do. So I did not see Quindy say anything in response to Valender's question, but so just in case she wasn't reading and she hears that, if she has news, she can share it. She just shared a link to the Learn to Paint kit. In case you are not familiar with those. Quinny does not know anything about Crow's Nest. I will try to ask the people involved what their plan is if they're coming back, because they teased us with this new format idea, and then we're still waiting. I think that's everything. I assume, Quindy, that you shared a link to the MSP Open thing, like the reapercon.com site. So if you go to the reapercon.com site, and Quindy has just shared a link, compilation of helpful threads on the forums, I think, and then the ReaperCon website. If you go on my site, a lot of this stuff I covered last week, if you don't feel like watching the whole video, about, which category do I enter, or why is a bronze in painters maybe the painting quality looks a little different than a bronze in open. I've got a lot of pictures and discussion that answers the common questions that come up in the feedback and stuff. And that is called, what is it called? I'm going to say MSP Open Facts. If you search MSP Open on my site, if you go into a blog post, there should be a little search bubble thing, and put MSP Open in there, and something that sounds like it should come up pretty quick. It's listed on the front table of contents page too, but that's kind of a disaster right now and needs some assistance. So if you don't want to deal with that, just do a search. Pendrake is saying that the news Crow's Nest format is a stealth format, so it's been happening this whole time. We just didn't realize. And I'm pretty sure my screen is flickering again, so I'm going to ask Quindy to find us a raid so that you... yes, there, Quindy's got the link. It's the MSP Open and Metals FAQ. So she's going to find a raid so that if you're hoping to watch some other hobby fun, you can keep doing that, even though I'm going to go do some other thing. Because my nerve pinch is back, so... As a health and safety tip, go learn how to do chin tucks, and just do chin tucks and don't stare at your phone like that. That is my tip to you. You will be rating Art of Mike Disney. Please say hi, spread the Reaper love, and hopefully I'll see you next week. If there's something particular you'd like to see, especially in relation to ReaperCon or entering contests and stuff, shoot me a note and I'll see what I can do. Bye. See you next week, everybody.